You think you know the true history of the Ultimate Fighting Championship? But the official story is a carefully crafted illusion designed to hide a dark reality from the fans who pay for violence. They want you to believe it is a classic American fairy tale about two casino brothers and a loud, bald promoter who risked everything, but this empire was not built on luck or simple hard work. The official narrative is a lie that protects the powerful men at the top, because the real foundation of this monopoly was not built on sweat, innovation, or the American dream of fair play. It was built on deep secrets buried in the Nevada desert, and the money that saved the UFC came from a specific place in history when Las Vegas was not run by clean corporations, but by shadows. We need to look closely at the Fertitta family to understand the truth, because Lorenzo and Frank did not just appear from nowhere with millions in cash to burn on a bloody spectacle politicians hated. Their father was Frank Fertitta Jr., and his story explains everything about how the UFC operates today, because he arrived in Las Vegas from Texas in the 60s with a dangerous set of skills. He did not come alone. He came from Galveston, Texas, which at the time was known as the Free State, because it was the primary training ground for the legendary Mateo crime syndicate operations. In Galveston, illegal gambling was an art form, and the Mateo family ran the town with absolute authority, creating a sanctuary where the law did not apply and vice was the engine of the economy. Frank Jr. learned the trade there as a young man, learning how to handle the numbers, how to manage the flow of illicit cash, and learning the lesson that silence is the most valuable currency. When the law finally cracked down on the Texas operations, the talent moved west to Las Vegas, where the rules were looser, and Frank Jr. got a job at the Stardust, the most notorious casino in town. The Stardust was ground zero for the organized crime Skim operation that defined the era, a system where the mob siphoned millions of dollars directly from the count room before the taxman saw it. The Skim was a simple but brilliant system where cash vanished. Men removed cash from the count room before it could be recorded, placed it into bags, and walked it right out the back door quietly. That unrecorded money left the building and flowed directly to the crime bosses in the Midwest, who controlled the unions and the pension funds, fueling a nationwide network of total corruption. The FBI spent decades trying to stop this flow of cash, and Frank Jr. was right there in the middle of the action, rising to become the general manager of the Stardust while the Skim was active. He watched the operation up close from the inside, and while he was never convicted of racketeering, he worked directly for the men who were eventually sent to prison for stealing millions of dollars. FBI wiretaps from that era recorded the bosses discussing his role, mentioning him as part of the crew that helped move the money, proving he saw how the chaotic violence of the mob made profits. But Frank Jr. was smarter than the guys who ended up dying in cornfields or sitting in federal prison. He saw that the era of the mob was ending because the FBI was finally getting too good at it. He knew the future was not in stealing from the house, but in owning the house, so he took his deep knowledge of the industry and pivoted to a new strategy that would change Las Vegas forever. He built a small place called the Casino, and then he expanded it into Palace Station, which was the birth of Station Casinos, a brand designed specifically for the local gamblers of Las Vegas. It was a place for locals to gamble paychecks away from the tourist strip, but you have to ask where the seed money came from for this massive project when banks were terrified of lending to him. The capital had roots in that old world, using gray money that needed a new home and a legitimate business, and this capital built the foundation for the empire his sons would eventually inherit. His sons Lorenzo and Frank III grew up watching this transformation. They went to high school with a friend named Dana White, and they saw their father build an empire from the dust of the desert. They learned a crucial lesson from him about power. You must legitimize the violence and put a sharp suit on the thug so that Wall Street and the government will accept your money as clean capital. Station Casinos became a public company, washing the image clean with Wall Street money, and the Fertitta brothers took that lesson and applied it to a dying spectacle called no-holds-barred fighting. The UFC was effectively dead at that time. Politicians called it human cockfighting. Senator John McCain wanted it banned across the country, and major cable companies refused to touch the product. The owner was desperate to sell because he was losing money every day. So he sold the UFC to the Fertittas for just $2 million, which was pocket change for them at the time of the sale. But they were not buying a sport. They were buying power and influence, and they used their deep casino connections to save the brand from total extinction when nobody else could have saved it. Lorenzo had served on the Nevada State Athletic Commission, the government body that regulates all fighting, and he knew exactly which levers to pull to get the sport sanctioned by the government. He knew how to get the sport sanctioned because he used to be the regulator. This is the brilliance of the scheme, using the regulatory power gained from their casino business to fix the rules. They wrote the regulations to suit their new investment, creating a unified set of rules that made the violence palatable to TV executives. But the early years were still a total financial disaster. The UFC lost $40 million in the start, bleeding cash every single month as they tried to educate the public. And most investors would have quit after losing that much money on a pipe dream. But the Fertittas had deep pockets and extreme patience. They knew how the house always wins if you can just stay at the table long enough, and they treated the UFC exactly like a casino floor. The fighters were the slot machines. You keep them spinning as much as possible. You control the payouts strictly. You never let the player win in the long run because the math is on your side. Then came the Ultimate Fighter reality show, which was their Trojan horse. It put the violence on free TV disguised as a competition, and it forced the audience to care about the fighters as people. It made the fighters into characters the fans could love, and the finale changed history forever when Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar engaged in a bloodbath that was broadcast live into homes. The ratings exploded and the money started to pour in. Suddenly, the UFC was not a crime. It was a mainstream sport that advertisers wanted to buy, and the huge gamble had finally paid off for them. This is where the old mob tactics returned with a vengeance. The Fertittas and Dana White began to eliminate all competition using their new cash flow, ensuring no other promoter could challenge them. They did not use guns like the old days. They used checkbooks and lawsuits, and they were ruthless in their pursuit of total control, buying out rival promoters just to shut them down completely. They bought Pride in Japan and killed it. They bought Strikeforce and dissolved it. They bought the WEC and absorbed it. They created a total monopoly where they were the only game in town. This is the bust-out tactic used by organized crime for decades. You take over a business, you strip it of assets, you close it down to remove rivals, and you leave nothing but scorched earth. The UFC bought rivals just to bury them, absorbing the best fighters into their roster and leaving the rest to starve in the regional leagues, controlling the market with no mercy for anyone else. If you wanted to fight for real money, you had to fight for them. There was no other choice, and Dana White became the loud face of this ruthless operation, distracting the media with outbursts. He swore at reporters and acted like a tough guy from South Boston, but he was just the front man. The real power was always the quiet brothers in the background who managed the debt and laws. The Fertittas stayed in the shadows, managing the complex financial structures and applying the station casinos model to human beings in a cage, treating athletes like assets on a balance sheet. They optimized the revenue per fighter by suppressing fighter pay to keep the margins high, ensuring that the company kept the vast majority of the money generated by the blood and sweat of athletes. In boxing, the Ali Act provides federal protections for fighters, ensuring transparency, but in the UFC there were no protections, and fighters got maybe 10 or 16% of the total revenue. This is the classic racket structure. You control the venue, you control the labor, you set the price, and if the labor complains, you starve them out or cut them from the roster to send a message. The UFC grew into a global monster, holding events in Abu Dhabi and Brazil, and the valuation soared into the billions of dollars. But the methods remained the same, organized control disguised. Then came the exit strategy in 2016. The Fertittas decided it was time to cash out because the market was at a peak, and they saw the potential for major legal trouble on the horizon. They looked for a buyer who wanted a monopoly and found WME IMG. The sale price was $4 billion, turning their initial $2 million investment into the greatest return in sports. They turned $2 million into $4 billion, but look at the timing. They sold right before the antitrust lawsuits gained traction and right before the fighters started to attempt to organize a union. They took the cash and walked away clean, leaving the new owners to deal with the legal headaches, and now the company is part of TKO Group, merged with the WWE into a publicly traded giant. The mob roots are completely covered by expensive corporate suits, but the patterns repeat themselves if you look closely at their new ventures, specifically the Power Slap League Dana promotes. It is unregulated violence that is dangerous and controversial, following the exact same playbook. Take something raw and illegal, put high-definition cameras on it, sell ads, and claim it is sport. They ignore the brain damage and the medical warnings because they are counting the money. The gambling integration is the final piece, with the UFC now funded heavily by DraftKings and betting apps. You can bet on every punch, merging the casino and the cage into one entity, completing the circle that Frank Fertitta Jr. started when he worked in the count room at the Stardust casino years ago. Now his sons built a system where the fighting is the count room, and the fighters claim they are underpaid while a massive class action lawsuit exposes the ruthless tactics used to keep them down. Private text messages released in court show the ruthlessness of the management. They called the fighters guys who need to be told what to do, trading them like cattle for profit and laughing at it. They laughed about the absolute control they had over their lives, proving that this is not just business. This is a system of control that mirrors the hierarchy of the old crime families perfectly. The boss eats first, and the soldiers get the scraps. The system protects itself because the UFC realized that if you own the regulator, you are the law, and they captured the state apparatus entirely. They shaped the Nevada Commission and hired former regulators to work for them, creating a revolving door that ensured the government would never look too closely at their business practices or treatment. It is a lesson in American capitalism. If you make enough money, your past crimes become history, your ruthless tactics become case studies in business schools, and the world forgets the source. But we must remember the source. The discipline to lose $40 million came from somewhere, and it came from the certainty that the house eventually wins if you rig the game correctly from day one. The Fertittas applied the patience of a pit boss, waiting for the card turn because they knew the math better than anyone else at the table, understanding that most promoters were fans while they operated. Most promoters were fans of the sport who got emotional. The Fertittas were operators who knew that violence sells, and it has always sold since the days of the Roman Colosseum to the modern octagon. The venue changes, but the human desire for blood does not change. It only gets more expensive to produce. And the genius was in the packaging, putting rules in place not to save the fighters. They added rounds and weight classes to make it look like a sport, but the hook was always the knockout, the danger, and the possibility that you might see someone get seriously hurt on live TV. They monetized the instinct to watch a car crash, and now the UFC is bigger than ever, but the fighters are still fighting for pennies compared to boxers, while the monopoly power remains intact. The new owners are just as ruthless. Ari Emanuel is a Hollywood shark who understands power and keeps the machine running efficiently, while Dana White is still the barking dog who distracts the media. But the soul of the company is the same. It is an extraction machine for profit that extracts health from young men and women and converts that health into shareholder value and dividend payments. The cost is paid in the future. The fighters will have CTE, broken bodies, and no pension, while the owners will have yachts and private islands, proving that the trade is fundamentally exploitative. This is the warning for the modern fan. You're not just watching a sport, you're watching a business built on a predatory philosophy that sees human beings as disposable assets to be used up. The mob money did not disappear. It just graduated, went to business school, got a stock ticker symbol, and became respectable corporate cash that trades on the New York Stock Exchange every day. The secret is that there is no secret anymore. The method is out in the open, visible in the contracts, the revenue split, and the lawsuits. But we choose to ignore it because the show is too good. The Fertitta brothers are now retired from the fight game. Billionaires many times over who own yachts that cost more than the entire annual payroll of the fighters they used to employ in the cage. They won the game. They legitimized the illegitimate and proved that with enough time and money, you can scrub any history clean and force the world to accept your version of the truth forever. But when you watch the next pay-per-view, look closer at the screen. Look at the logos on the canvas. Look at the desperation in the fighters' eyes, and realize you are looking at the legacy. It is still the count room. The money is just digital now. The Skim is called EBITDA. The bosses are called CEOs. And the violence is the product that fuels the entire machine of extraction. The fighters are the raw material, and the system is designed to burn them up and replace them with new blood, creating a cycle of exploitation that generates billions of dollars for the top men. This is the legacy of the secret money. We accept it because we are entertained, we cheer for the knockout, and we ignore the human cost because it is easier to watch the fight than question it. The UFC is the ultimate American success story because it combines violence, gambling, and corporate greed into a perfect package that mirrors the darkest instincts of our times in high definition. So next time you hear Dana White scream about freedom, remember this. He is the front man for a system built on total control, a system with deep, dark roots that go back to organized crime. The mob didn't die. It just bought a suit, learned to file an S-1 form, and learned that the stock market is the biggest casino of them all, where the house has an even bigger advantage than Vegas. 3 things to take away. 1, origins matter because the DNA is set at the start. 2, monopolies always hurt the workers. And 3, regulation is often bought by the people it should watch. The story of the UFC is a warning about how money washes away sins, and it forces us to ask a difficult question. Are we watching a sport, or are we watching a human sacrifice for rich men? The answer might make you uncomfortable, but the Fertittas knew this, they banked on it, and they walked away with $4 billion, leaving the rest of us to argue about the morality of violence. Now the question is for you to answer. Do you care where the money comes from, or do you just want blood? The choice is yours to make, but now you see the strings that control the puppets. If you want to see more dark histories of billion-dollar empires that the media won't tell you, smash that like button and hype this video in the comments right now to help us spread the truth. Subscribe for the truth they hide, because the rabbit hole goes deeper than you think, and we dig where others won't to bring you the stories that matter. See you in the next one.